sorry, I have wonderful images, believe me, that I collected in the last 20 years. And maybe it will work. Well, if it's not, we are going to repeat this after my return to June. I'm leaving tomorrow for 5 weeks. Hopefully, it will be different title, Warplanes to Siberia. Today is the title, Alaska at War, Alaska-Siberia Airway during World War II. And the Brad said, well, don't worry about it, just be more entertaining. Just say more jokes. Well, I don't know many jokes, Brad, about World War II. So I'll do my best. Well, we have on display a book that we put together about 5 years ago after the erected memorial in Fairbanks. The only Lend-Lease memorial. Can you hear this microphone or without? Okay, you know, the only Lend-Lease memorial in the world, and only the Soviet and American officers that are standing together with FDR. Quote, you know, the structure of the world peace and so on. Very well known after his Yalta conference when he came back to the United States and he approached, you know, the Congress with that on his trip. Now, how it's all started, you know, because this was during the war a secret operation. It's called Hula operation. And in the Soviet Union, of course, they tried to keep it secret, and they did very well until early 1980s. And as well as in the United States. And normally when we think about the war, we think about the battlefield. You know, D-Day, Pearl Harbor. We think about, you know, the soldiers collided on the field. But this is a different war. This is a war that thousands of people are involved. It's a home front. But of course it has to do a lot with either manufacturing, that the United States did a great job, or delivery of the goods. You can't just put them in the mail. You know, you have to have a system of the large deliveries of stuff. So how it started, I remember in 1986, was one of the first delegation from the Soviet Union then came to Juneau. And one of the, oh, very good. Oh, anyway. So, okay, I'm saved. I have many images, but I have to. We recognize. I'm not going to show them it. Basically, it's all before the PowerPoint. Okay, so I'll start here. And so he was an editor of Izvestia newspaper. His name was Vladimir Nadin. And he came and he said, you know, Alexander, during the war there was a secret operation in Alaska. We don't talk much about that, but can you take me to your archives? I want to look for some information. And I took him to the State Library. And yeah, we found, you know, the book written by Major Jordan in the 1950s about that, and also the list of somehow, you know, in our archives we had it, a list of pilots that perished during this operation. And basically he left, and I forgot about that until my ex-wife reminded me, and then she said, well, you know, my patient, Bill Shapi, and he used to live in Juneau, you know, Shapi family, they're kind of prominent in Juneau. And she said, you know, he wants to talk to you. During the war he was in Fairbanks, and then I was the only Soviet-born Russian in Juneau, so he was kind of eager to meet the Russian finally many years later. So I came to see Bill Shapi, and over the tea he started telling me the story. And I just said, well, this is not a nonsense story. You know, his recollections. And then he invited me again, and he invited me again. Finally, he gave me his memoirs, you know, written here by hand. And I just thought, well, I better really take a very, very good look at it. So I started doing my own research, and it brought me to a World War II institute in University of Maryland. They collected historians around the country. Then I went to archives, I went to Pentagon, and finally my chapter came out in Alaska at War book. And then in a Congress in Ireland, in Iceland, they also were involved in the Lend-Lease, you know, so I gave a presentation and another chapter came out. And then Bill Shapi, he said, well, Alexander, is there a memorial for Lend-Lease? Well, you know, I had a board of directors with my center, and John Binkley, Bill Riley, Robert Price were there. I said, well, guys, let's just build a memorial. And 6 years later, the memorial was erected, and it was the largest international event in Alaska history when Donald Rumsfeld came, and the Minister of Defense of Ivanov, and 5 ambassadors. So that we really did a very good job. And last time I was in Fairbanks, with Russian filmmakers for the 70th anniversary. In fact, yesterday was exactly 70 years of the first delivery via Alaska to Russia. They did a documentary film, 52 minutes, was broadcasted 3 weeks ago on the Channel 1 in Russia before 150 million viewers. So when they went 6 years later, I look at the memorial again, and I remember like Holland, America, the bus pulled over and about 40, 50 the passengers, came to the memorial and interpreted for 25 minutes or so, and they walk around, and that was very educational, so it really did get the message, and it's also good for their tourism. So I was very pleased. So now let me start, follow this. Basically, the United States Lend-Lease program, it wasn't just a gift. It was a loan, or it was given, to other recipients with expectations of return after the war. There were certain conditions. If equipment was destroyed in a battlefield, then there is no return. But if equipment is still in a good shape, they have to give it back. And so the British Prime Minister, and I wrote this on the plaque on our memorial in Fairbanks, he said, give us the tools and we will finish the job. And Lend-Lease eventually provided the British and other allies with nearly 50 billion worth of tools. Multiplied by 18 of today's dollars, normally with inflation, it's about $900 billion. Equal to stimulus package, but with a good purpose. In May of 1945, when war ended in Europe, Winston Churchill stated it was American war production that won the war in Europe. When Russians went to Fairbanks, they didn't like that statement. Of course, I wouldn't write 27 people in the Soviet Union were killed or so and so on. But I thought it was important because out of this $50 million, 33 really went to Great Britain. And Great Britain was our close allies during the war. And the other, about $10 billion, between 10 to 12, went to the Soviet Union, was the second largest recipient, but also to other countries. There were 42 recipients. And many people do not know that our former Senator Stevens was one of the Lend-Lease pilots from India to China over the hump. And of course, he was a sponsor of our project. And he was a very humble man, but I know how difficult it was because go over the Himalayas, you had to fly in a very high elevation. So that the 42 countries were under the Lend-Lease program. And here you don't see that another sign. FDR signs the Lend-Lease Act on March 11 of 1941, well, several months before Pearl Harbor. In a way, that was economic declaration of war. Because the shipment started, to England and to other countries, and of course, that is what it was. So indeed, from 1941 to 1945, American factors poured an avalanche of weaponry, 40 billion bullets, 300,000 aircraft. Now, before the war, we manufactured 500. During the war, we ended up with 300,000. Soviet Union manufactured 127. 76,000 ships. When it is in the plaque and the memorial, and when Rumsfeld looked and they said, "Oh my goodness!" I said, "Well, it's all vessels. It's not only it's amphibian. It's a destroyer. It's all ships all together. It's about 76,000." But think about it: Liberty ships. In Kodiak, this the fishing facility that we have. It's still a Liberty ship that was converted, to modern day factory after the war. 86,000 tanks and 2.6 million machine guns. But it's a much greater number because aluminum was just invented and Russians were needing aluminum for their airplanes. Their airplanes were made of plywood before the war, mostly. They started new production, but they didn't have aluminum at the time. Of course, the marine cables and so on. So U.S. Congress approved Lend-Lease in March of 1941. The passing Lend-Lease in effect. Lend-Lease by the United States was a system of transfer of goods. Well, actually, the Lend-Lease was debated in the United States. Not everyone. Well, Great Britain was not debated. Soviet Union was debated. So that some senators, like Truman, he was a senator then, and he said, well, if you see that Germany is winning, we should help Soviet Union. We see that Soviet Union is winning, we should help Germany. So that was his statement, actually, before the war. But on June 22nd, the Soviet Union was attacked. They didn't expect it. Of course, 70% of their officers, they were on vacation, because who is going to attack during the middle of the summer? Normally, campaign starts in spring. But here was attack at Blitzkrieg, and of course, in 2 weeks, as you see, the large territory already was invaded. More than 50% of Russian Air Force was destroyed in 2 weeks. In Germany, in Berlin, headquarters didn't believe it. It was 50%. He said, "Can you recount it?" So they recounted. They come out even with a larger number. And the Kiev was surrounded, the largest surrounding in the world history in the military. 700,000 soldiers were surrounded around the Kiev and Uman. And the Germans basically started advancing, to Stalingrad and to Moscow. So the support was, needed from the Soviet Union. Well, the Roosevelt was not done, of course. He sent his main advisor, Hopkins, right after the war. But in fact, on the next day, $1 billion of interest-free was given to the Soviet Union, and also $50 million were frozen in American banks, because Soviet Union started the war in 1939 with Finland. So United States didn't like that, and we freeze their amounts. But then, of course, we released it back, so they could buy, some equipment right away. So that even without the land lease on the second day, United States already supported Soviet Union at that time, and said Hopkins. Hopkins basically met with Stalin and Nada, and his assessment was, yeah, the Russians will step. They're not going to give up that easily, and basically FDR worked on approval of Congress to put Soviet Union under the land lease. But remember that United States recognized the jure de facto Soviet Union only on November 16, 1933. There was a lot of hostility against the Soviet Union. The communists were not allowed to United States. A well-known poet, Yesenin and Mayakovsky, were kicked out of this country for their communist propaganda and so on. So it wasn't, the attitude was not exactly to support Soviet Union, but, that they realized that Nazi Germany is much greater danger than a socialist regime in the Soviet Union. So here you see several the routes that the United States started Lend-Lease. The one route, Northern route, was absolutely ferocious. Just 2 weeks ago, Soviet Union established a reward for those who participated in the Northern route, and it's considered in the British Parliament. And I think it's coming to the United States that Lend-Lease participants will receive rewards, those who will be nominated, and I will nominate at least 10 people in Alaska that I know. And put this way, the Northern Route, European theater, basically Liberty ships with a convoy of protection and German submarines that were searched around. Out of 800 ships, about 140 were sunk. And it was basically a battlefield, Navy battlefield. The Liberty ships or other shipmen were always under protection of British or United States military vessels. And another one, and maybe there is a better slide when I go here, you can see there's 4 routes. Another one was really very long one. You see the route number 2, it goes around the Cape Cod and then to Basra. And the problem with airplanes, because the Russians don't need Air Force, they couldn't win the war without Air Force. And they didn't have it at that time. Is that the planes have to be dismantled and then shipped via the desert in Iran, and the same caused the problem to the engine. It was a very long way, although it was quite relatively safe. The submarines, Germans, and they weren't there. So the Roosevelt right away proposed to deliver airplanes via Alaska to Vladivostok with hope, using American pilots, by the way. With hope is that the United States can establish the military bases, somewhere in Siberia that would help him, with the war in Japan. Stalin categorically denied, for whatever reasons. And of course now the Russians produced the film, and I read the script before it was done, and they called it a Stalin route. I completely demanded to change the name. They still use the Stalin word. It was a Stalin idea. It was a Roosevelt idea. It was United States initiative. But how to build it? You see that, and actually the 4th route, you see, it goes again from Seattle to Deutsche Harbor, to Kodiak, and then to, this one. And then to the Russian Far East via the Latarus Strait. You see that United States were at war with Japan, but Soviet Union wasn't. So it was American ships under the Soviet flag were going, to the Russian ports, and Japan and of course Germany could not stop that. So it was 42% of $10 billion that was given to the Soviet Union actually went through Kodiak, through that route. And there was some also the cases of heroism on that route as well. So now with Alaska, to build it, of course, the idea was there, but how to deliver? For example, let's see, on early September, 20 P-40 planes and several A-20 went first, the transfer was done to Alaska. It actually went through Juneau. Went through Juneau, like Alaska Airline route to Anchorage, and then to Fairbanks, because Alaska Highway have not been completed yet. And the airfields built for this delivery, they were going along with Alaska Highway, and all these airfields will build along that. So it was completed, about a month or two later. But the very first, delivery of the planes, it took, from Fairbanks, it took 33 days to get to Krasnoyarsk. So 3 airplanes were lost in a way to Fairbanks. And the film the Russians made, they started with Fairbanks to Krasnoyarsk, where it's ended. But of course, both trips were very complicated because there were no airfields, the radio communication was limited, the weather broadcast was limited on both sides. And we have to remember that the aviation at that time was in the pioneering stages. Lindbergh, his voyage, to Europe was 1927, as I remember. So just, 14 years after, we are not there yet. Now, so this is the route. You see, in the blue is Alcan, Alaska, Canada. In the red is Alaska-Siberia. They're both very complicated. And of course, for that, you have to train pilots. You have to train the schedule, how to bring pilots to the airfield and bring them back and so on. So it was a lot of logistics involved. In the United States, this I have, the 7th Fairing Group was formed just for that purpose of delivery. And of course, the pilots were trained. They were ferry pilots. They were not the combat pilots. You will learn later on in my presentation, if I have a time, that also the women Air Force service pilots were involved. And in the Soviet Union, what happened here, the planes from the places of manufacture, and like Buffalo is it's a Bell production, P-39 and the P-63, maybe a few other planes. I think Seattle supplied Boeing with a B-25 bomber. I think Texas was A-20 light bomber and so on. So they had to come to Great Falls. In the Great Falls, basically, they were inspected and then they were delivered to Fairbanks. The agreement was in Fairbanks. Soviet pilots will pick it up, learn how to, work with this equipment, and then take it, to Krasnoyarsk. But Eastern Front advanced over the years, so Krasnoyarsk was not the final destination. So you have to basically bring those planes to the Eastern Front, and that's a very historic picture. First Russian military mission to Alaska arrives at Nome. Oh boy, I don't have, last time I gave this presentation, it took 1 hour, 15 minutes. So I don't have that luxury today. But I want to read you, that very, very interesting, statement. Let's see where it is. If I find it, well, I guess I will not. So that the Russians came, and you see the 2 women, there are 2 interpreters. And the Russians, of course, they came in their leather uniform, and that they were told to be proper. That's what the quotation I want to read. They were told, if you want to drink, you drink in your own room, but hide your keys under the bed so you cannot find it. On the next morning or something like that. It was very hilarious. It is in my book because we interview people who is no longer here. And that's how, they came with their own perception, what the United States is all about. In fact, in Fairbanks, we just found the memoirs of radio operator that's been there for 70 years. And of course, Russians saw it and I saw it. I didn't want to give it to them. 200 pages handwritten. I think they got it anyway. Museum, by the visit, they gave him a copy, so I don't know what is going to happen. But this fella, he was writing wonderful the memoirs, and I'm going to publish this book in both languages at some point about his meeting in Nome, and how he didn't want to exchange his rifle for American rifle, and American pilot wanted to have his rifle. It was interesting scenes. And the Russians, of course, they have to learn a great deal about the United States then. And that's another, historic picture. I believe it's a B-25. Maybe somebody knows better from this angle. I can't tell. But anyway, and you can see the Russians in an old uniform. It's a uniform before 1943. They had a little bit different. After 1943, they had this uniform kind of resembled pre-imperial uniform, maybe for the reason of to rise nationalism. And that's already, you see the different uniform. It's actually, this picture is in Yakutsk, I just found out. And this man in the middle, yeah, he is in charge, Mazuruk, and there's a polkovnik, the colonel that he stays with him. So basically it's a Russian headquarters in Yakutsk. And that's an interesting picture. We were in the Fairbanks. I asked John Binkley, I just got this picture a couple of months ago. And that's the two Russians in Fairbanks in the Cushman Street. And John Binkley sent me, said, well, that's how it looks now. That's kind of cool, is it? And of course, that what happened, they had to deliver those planes, and of course the Russians, they came with their own pilots and their own mechanics, and they had only two interpreters. It's kind of funny, only two. But, so there were at the heyday of this program, there were about 600 Russians in Alaska, so it's quite a number. They had their own headquarters, they had their own that embassy or sort of mission in Fairbanks. Now it's a funeral house, but they were in Fairbanks. We went at that time, and the guy who was in charge of funeral, he gave me a lot of photographs of somebody. I know where he got it. So the Fairbanks really changed, with coming of so many people now. And of course the manufacturing. You see, there's a Bell P-63 King Cobra started in production in 1944. But interesting thing that when the planes that were built in the United States, but then they would paint the Russian stars in a factory, and those planes would have to cross the United States with the Russian insignia, with the Russian stars. And I know some people, they were kind of surprised in Arkansas, look at this, and planes were covered up with American stars. And I imagine how they felt. And that's interesting production of P-63. You see, the last P-39 is the last one is coming, and then the whole P-63. It's a legendary plane. And the legendary because it has the cannon, 37F cannon in front of the pilot and engine behind. So it was an unusual design. Americans didn't like it. On the Pacific, it didn't do very well. But the Russians loved it because they could shoot at tracks and tanks. And many of them had their pilots, had 49 or 50 kills with this, So the Russians called it a flying cannon. It served their purpose. And that's one of the pictures I received recently. You see, the Bell factory is closed. They're no longer in operation, but there are the newsletters, they're still there. Well, look at this. And, in the Russian film, I gave a lot of photographs, and they used this one. Bell booby trap. And I just looked at the film and said, idiots, this has nothing to do with your film. But, I read the script, but I didn't see that. I don't know how they miss it. Why they call it booby traps, especially WASP pilots who flew the P-39. Because it worked funny, that Jeannie Wood said it always overheated. She's a WASP pilot in Fairbanks, she's still alive. And it was difficult to, lift it up, when you go up. And the doors, didn't work very well because normally the planes before you go from upside down. Here was like a vehicle hour, you open the door, you get into the plane. So it was a little different design. Of course, there were some malfunctions. Oh, where to go? And that planes, they go over Canada. There wasn't an easy journey. And of course, when they would come, that's lead field. There's still one hangar one still from the war. In fact, we got in this time. The Russians could not, but I was a Visitors Convention Bureau in Fairbanks. We went to do some footage for them of contemporary lead field. That is a Wainwright today. Now, this is an unusual photograph. And Randy Accord, he was a test pilot during the war. And he was very secretive to the last day of his life. But finally, he gave me this. And that basically was called the weather testing detachment, where the test pilots in the United States that tested planes before they would turn into the Russians. And Randy Accord, when I interviewed him, he is Randy when he is young. When I interviewed him in early 1990s, then I worked at Alaska Department of Education. He called my commissioner and he said, well, you better watch, you have a catch-a-bee guy in your place. And then, of course, a year later, I didn't know that, but, years later, I met with Randy and I interviewed him on the video, so I had this nice tape, and he told me that, and I said, that's strange. But anyway, the difficulties, of course, were also the linguistic difficulties, because the instruments were written in English. The Russians, sometimes the metric system was different. In fact, some crashes were occurred because of that. They look on the meter and said 200 gallons. They think it's 200 liters. So the weather is bad. They're afraid to go back because they think there's not enough fuel. But there is enough fuel, And so they would carry them. Russians would carry the red ink, or what is it? The lipstick. So they would, with the lipstick, they would write on instruments. 200 meters or gallons, and of course everything was different here. And they see the Russians and American mechanic was interpreter. They look at the, at the instructions. Now, Bill Sharpie, that's when he was young, really. If not this man, I probably would never start this project. And Bill Sharpie was a wonderful man, and just a man. And of course, I could tell how that impact it made on his life. Let me just, I still want to read this. And when he was in Nome, he met a Captain Gubin, and he writes in the book, in his memoirs that are published, engineer officer in Nome, very friendly, nice fellow. He and his wife and 2 children lived off base in a small house near the city center. I lived in a hotel with 3 other factory representatives. And I spent several nice Sundays in the Gubin's home for dinner and drinks. Remember one Sunday so well, friendly conversations with many husky drinks. He spoke good English, and we spent many hours talking politics and comparing our form of governance. Stalin, of course, was a big hero, always a toast for Stalin and Roosevelt. The captain's wife didn't speak much English, but she kept apologizing for the poor furnishings, dishes, and silver. One Sunday, I remember so well, following several drinks, we came to the table and large bowls of soup were served. I assumed that was it. But then the main course was served, a huge beef tongue and vegetables, and dark bread. This is a rich meat, and everyone had to be served seconds. I didn't think I would be able to stand up. I've often thought how rough those times were of Captain's wife, unable to speak English, with 2 young kids in a small house, no running water and no sewer system, going from house to house with horse-drawn sled in the winter. What he didn't know, Bill Sharpie, that actually Captain Gubin was an intelligent officer. I found it out later. It's written now. We have the list. But apparently he liked Bill Sharpie, and he was a frequent guest. What is important in all this program is that the 2 nations, 3 nations, Canada too, got together in order to deliver those goods, to fight against a common enemy. And there is a human relationships, you find many of those, because they had to work together, in order to deliver these planes. And of course, when Bill Sharpie meets somebody like that every day, working for 10 hours a day, every day, for 3 consecutive years. If this is not heroism, then what heroism is? I question myself. So that's a bill, and of course, you know, the Russians on their side. It wasn't easy because, you know, that the Russians mostly, they were combat pilots. The combat pilots have a different way of delivering things. They just basically have to go in a short distance, do their job, and come back. He is a ferry. You know, you have to deal with the weather. You have to deal with equipment. You have to fly in some sort of arrangements. You know, it's not individual plane. Normally B-25 would lead because they had better radio system, and then 5 or 7 or 6, you know, fighters like P-39 or P-63 will fly behind. This picture in Nome with the P-63 behind, when the Russians and US together. But, you know, to me, look at this, you know, this is so moving. One is Captain Gamov, he's to the right, and an American pilot. They really become friends over the time, just doing things together, you know, knowing that they are working for the same cause. And this is the Russians in all uniform. You see 1942. And of course, Soviet combat pilots, the mission regarded arrest from combat. That also, Bill Shotty, he writes, you know, I don't know how anybody can drink so much and then fly the airplane in the morning. So they had a lot of booze were going through there. And of course, occasionally, you know, they had those, you know, officers. And of course, Bill Shotty also writes about that, you know, that they would play the music and dance to the point that the fingers would be bleeding of those who play the balalaika or guitar. That's very interesting. I don't know if you know about RTC's Alaska. Henry Warner Poor, beautiful book, published in 1944. If you want to learn about Alaska 1944 from somebody who is a really intelligent person to read this. And so he was an artist who was commissioned during the war to Alaska, and he wanted to come to Alaska instead of Pacific or other places. And he left very good paintings, and he writes about how he did. This is a Russian translator, and this is the headquarters of the Russian pilots eat. We have at the museum view, actually it's an Anchorage museum, you know, his, you know, pictures. Now, I go back to, now Siberia, and I really don't have much time, so I just basically, that's how they built it, their airfields. There were other routes through the Arctic Ocean to the Lena Yenisei River. That's why they chose locations for them, because the United States very early started delivering this equipment to build, it's not Russian, it's US, that did Land-Lease before the Land-Lease was signed, to build these airfields. And of course, the Russians, they use Gulag. You know, 95% of people who are Gulag. You know what this Gulag is, right? Prisoners in Siberia. Sometimes they would give them a shovel, and say, well, finish this by spring, otherwise we will never come back for you. So of course, they're in the middle of the taiga, so the guys were digging, you know, they could dig. That's I learned from the Russian filmmakers. And it's Ulkal, of course, the weather was better. There's so many scenes. What I said, you know, airplanes, you know, Eastern Front kind of extended. So when you look, you know, the distance, you know, Buffalo, New York to the Petersburg, this flight was actually crashed near the Leningrad. And that, the Russian pilots, they trained Russian pilots for the winter for some reason. You know, that there were 44 crashes in Russia and 133 in North America. Most of the crashes took place between Fairbanks and Nome, 78. I don't know why. But, you know, of course, the Russians would take care of that segment. Maybe too much work. But that's B-25 in Nome. And what I want to say that the Stalingrad battle, of course, was from November 1942 to early spring, to early 1943. And the P-39 already was used in a battle in Stalingrad. So, and of course, the T-34, the Russian tanks, but also American tanks. And those, of course, manufacturers, you know, they want to prize, you know, or, you know, their product, you know. It was very easy to read newsletters. I have them all, 1944, and I published them in the book if you just want to read how they advertise their product. You know, it's a war, but it's still manufacturing. And then, of course, you know, the Russian Pokrishkin, very well known, you know, 49 kills with the P-39 out of And that's, of course, U.S., you know, that Rychkala, the Pokryshny, he is 1942, and that's, you see how many stars. So basically he developed a new strategy of using this, the P-39 specifically. That's why he didn't want to change to another plane. And Rychkala, I think he had more kills than Pokryshny, but he's not that known. Now, Voss, very quickly. This is in a memorial, and I paid $1,500 for permission, actually, from Life magazine to use it, and to get a copyright. And again, when Ramsel was there, I said, well, this is from a magazine. I said, yeah, we purchased the rights. And also this, the Voss pilots, I call this the road to the equal rights. Really, if you look in the women's rights in the United States, that's one of the first chapters of equal rights. So it started in late 1943, 1944, and the 25,000 applications, 1,800 were accepted, 1,777, you know, were completed and accepted, and of course then started the training. The women pilots, Ginny Wood to the left, they didn't deliver this plane. I think it's either B-52 or B-72, who knows better, but that's a bummer, you know, we wouldn't give to the Russians. And Ginny Wood, you know, she gave these photographs. This pilot I see many times, but I don't know her name. You know, this one is our Juneau. Well, she lives now somewhere else. It's Ellen Campbell, and a T-6 plane. T-6 was a training plane. We give to Russians 56 of those. So, you know, they were involved, and actually 38 Voss pilots perished, were killed during this delivery. 2 Great Falls. They wouldn't go any further. But even to deliver from Buffalo or from Texas, you know, to Great Falls constituted some danger. And in fact, most of the 38 who perished, you know, they died in training. I have one interesting picture. The Soviets, you know, were combat pilots. This one to the right, Litviak, she had 11 kills. And Ginny Wood once said, you know, well, you know, we did nothing comparing to what Soviets did. Well, I wouldn't compare that. One is one, another one is another. But the Soviets, you know, they were combat pilots, and that particular group, they called them night witches, Germans, because those women, they didn't use advanced airplanes, but they would ferociously attack the German positions, and that's why they called night witches, because they were flying at night. Okay, that's a memorial when we opened in 2006. You can see me and Ransford and John Binkley, Minister Ivanov. Okay, we signed that, and that's the plaques what we had. That's a medallion that somebody will receive today. Of course, this is silver and gold. And that's Anna Kurtula and I in the White House. We give a medallion to President Bush. That's we are in the embassy. We give a medallion to Putin. And to veterans in Fairbanks, to the right is a woman from Russian embassy, not very happy camper. She stayed with a John Cockhill. I don't know, maybe I should put next time her into the hotel. And that's a production of the memorial, a few other pictures. I will, but I, you know, ask you if you have questions. I will end now. I can talk more.